Welcome to Talk Tickers. This week, we are doing a deep dive into a regulatory signal that is, well, maybe the loudest declaration yet of a new era of industrial policy. And it's coming directly from the Food and Drug Administration.
It's a huge moment, really.
The story is all about this landmark approval of U.S. antibiotics, extended release antibiotic, Augmentin XR. And this drug didn't just get fast-tracked.
No, not at all.
It was basically rocketed through the FDA's newest, most aggressive pathway, the Commissioner's National Priority Voucher, CNPV.
Which is a program we absolutely need to unpack.
Exactly. So our mission today is to figure out what this stunning, really 60-day green light tells us about the agency's priorities. It seems to be all about domestic supply chains, maybe even affordability over traditional drug novelty.
And critically, how investors should be reading these new policy signals. This is a crucial data point for anyone at that intersection of public health and, well, the capital markets.
So let's just start with the raw facts of the approval. The announcement came down on December 9th, 2025. The FDA gave the nod to Augmentin XR,
which is the extended release formulation of amoxicillin clavulinate potassium, made by UN's Antibiotics.
And the timeline is the real headline here, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this kind of application would normally operate under what's called the PDUFA clock.
Right, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act.
Yeah.
That's the system where drug companies pay fees to fund the FDA's review staff, and it sets these, expected deadlines.
Exactly. And for a standard review, you're looking at 10, maybe 12 months. This approval took roughly 2 months?
2 months.
2 months. I mean, they cut 80% off the standard review time. It's an acceleration that you haven't seen for a decades-old, non-novel generic drug.
And the reason for this insane urgency, it was completely non-clinical.
100%.
The FDA was totally explicit about it. They said the approval was in perfect alignment with the CNPV's national health priorities because it strengthens the U.S. drug supply chain.
And to really put a fine point on it, this specific drug, which is a critical antibiotic, had been completely unavailable in the U.S. since 2011.
Wow, since 2011.
Yeah, think about that. 14 years. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't gone because it was dangerous or ineffective. It was unavailable because the economic incentives to make it here in the U.S. had just evaporated.
So we became reliant on overseas facilities.
Totally. Augmentin XR is a foundational medicine first approved way back in 2002. Bringing back this extended release version, which is just a simpler twice-a-day dose, that helps patients actually finish their antibiotics.
Which is huge for fighting antimicrobial resistance.
It is huge. Commissioner McCarrie basically framed this whole approval as a necessary step to secure our supply of critical medicines.
So it's really less about a scientific breakthrough and much more about strategic national resilience.
Precisely.
Which brings us to the mechanism itself. If this wasn't a standard priority review, what exactly is this CNPV pilot?
You're getting to the core of the friction here. The CNPV pilot, it was launched by Commissioner McCarrie in June of 2025, and it's arguably the most aggressive discretionary tool the FDA has used in decades.
And what was the justification for creating it?
It was framed as a direct response to two, let's call them national security vulnerabilities. First, our massive reliance on foreign sources, especially China, for the active ingredients, the APIs, in our medicines.
Okay, that makes sense. And the second?
The deteriorating health of the U.S. population. Things like obesity were explicitly cited as a threat to military readiness and economic stability. So it's a very broad mandate.
That does sound ambitious. But, we already have fast-track programs. I think most people listening have heard of the Priority Review Voucher, the PRV system. How is this different?
That is the most important distinction for anyone trying to value these companies. The traditional PRVs are statutory.
Meaning Congress created them.
Yes, literally created by an act of Congress. Their criteria are strictly clinical things like neglected tropical diseases or rare pediatric diseases. They cut the review time from 10 months down to 6.
Okay.
But here's the key financial part. PRVs are transferable. They're sellable. They are a literal tradable financial asset. We've seen them sell for up to $350 million.
So a company that develops a rare disease drug can then sell that fast pass to a pharma giant for their next big blockbuster.
You got it. It's a market-based incentive. The CNPV, though, is the polar opposite.
How so?
It's extra statutory. It's a commissioner-driven pilot program. It doesn't have a specific congressional mandate. It relies on the FDA's own discretionary authority. And the criteria are way broader.
Broader in what way?
Well, there are 5 strategic objectives. Some are clinical, like innovative cures, But crucially, others are things like onshoring manufacturing for supply chain resilience or increasing affordability through pre-agreed pricing deals.
And that's what we're seeing here. The Augmentin XR approval clearly hits that onshoring and supply chain resilience target, not scientific novelty.
That's the entire point. The non-clinical elements are driving the train. We saw the same thing with the big obesity drugs. Their CNPVs were tied to pricing agreements for Medicare and Medicaid.
And to get this done in 30 to 60 days, they use these, what did you call them? Tumor board style review teams?
Yeah, that's the term they're using. They pull experts from all over the agency into these intensive, multidisciplinary teams to focus on just one application.
Now that speed and the fact that it's discretionary, as you said, that's got to be causing some serious friction, right? Doesn't that open the door to political favoritism?
It has absolutely become a political and governance flashpoint. Critics, in Congress and outside regulatory experts, they've been sounding the alarm.
What's their main argument?
That because it's not based in statute, the commissioner is basically taking on power that's normally reserved for Congress. They're warning it could become I think the quote was a lucrative gift for favored companies.
Creating a two-tiered system.
Exactly. And there's also a real concern that compressing the review into 30 or 60 days could undermine scientific rigor, even for a well-understood drug like this one.
They're essentially questioning whether the FDA can reprioritize based on politics or strategy without compromising its core mission, which is just evaluating safety and efficacy.
That is the fundamental tension. It's industrial policy versus the historical mandate of the agency. But if you look at the first group of recipients, there were 15. You can see the diversity of priorities in action.
Right, it's not just generics. We saw things like Regeneron's gene therapy for deafness, DBOTO, which is truly innovative.
And right alongside that, you have these essential generics like ketamine and Augmentin XR chosen specifically for that domestic manufacturing angle.
And you can't forget the blockbuster weight loss drugs from Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly.
You can't. And their inclusion was directly tied to those affordability agreements, which proves the commissioner's using this tool to drive economic outcomes like lower prices, just as much as supply chain security or innovation. It's a very versatile policy tool.
So let's pivot this policy shift into market context. Because the Augmentin XR case really shows that this industrial policy stuff, it's not just rhetoric anymore. It's a quantifiable factor in regulatory outcomes.
It has to be in your models now.
And the strategic value for U.S. antibiotics, it seems to hinge entirely on their domestic footprint.
100%. They are the sole U.S. manufacturer of amoxicillin and amoxicillin clavulanate. They have that huge 394,000 square foot facility down in Bristol, Tennessee.
So this CNPV is basically a massive validation of that strategy, a reward for keeping production here.
Yes, and it's de-risking a critical national vulnerability. Just look at the review itself. It was heavily weighted toward the non-clinical side. The Tiger team was full of experts in drug substance manufacturing facilities.
So they weren't reevaluating the drug's clinical data. They were just confirming the quality of the U.S. manufacturing.
That's it. The quality control process was the bottleneck they needed to clear, and they cleared it fast.
This sends a loud, clear signal to generic makers, and especially to CDMOs, the contract development and manufacturing organizations.
It really does. It says that domestic production of essential, even older drugs can now jump the regulatory queue if it helps solve a national security problem.
It creates a kind of regulatory premium.
That's the perfect term for it. It heavily favors U.S.-based companies with compliant domestic capacity. It's a reward for resisting that decades-long trend of offshoring.
So if you're a domestic generic company, you basically just got a regulatory moat built around you. But there has to be a flip side. What about the operational strain on the FDA?
This is the risk that sophisticated investors have to track. These 30 to 60-day reviews are incredibly resource-intensive. You have to pull your most experienced people into these Tiger teams.
And those people aren't working on other applications.
They're not. So while the CNPV drugs get this white-glove, hyper-accelerated treatment, the whole system is being strained.
So non-CNPV applications, even for serious innovative drugs, could actually face slower reviews now.
It's a definite possibility. The success of the CNPA pilot could directly translate into delays for everything else. You have to be aware that the price of accelerated national security might be the FDA struggling to meet its other deadlines.
Okay, we've outlined the policy, the precedent, the potential risks. Now for the segment where we pitch let's call it an outrageous but plausible trade idea.
And let's be very clear.
Yes, crystal clear. This is not financial advice. Strictly for discussion.
Purely discussion.
All right. The thesis. The CNPV has created a real, monetizable regulatory premium on domestic manufacturing capacity, especially for essential non-novel drugs. That ultra-fast review clock is worth millions in time-to-market advantage.
It absolutely is.
So the trade idea pitch. We're thinking a structural pair trade based on this industrial policy arbitrage. You initiate a long-term, long position on specific mid-cap U.S. generic pharma companies and CDMOs.
But not just any of them.
Right. You're looking for ones that have significant, maybe even depreciated U.S. production facilities and can make a credible claim for a CNPV based on onshoring or affordability.
Yeah, picture a company that, say, recently bought a shuttered U.S. fermentation plant. They have the asset base, they have the onshoring story. Now they have a direct line to jump the queue for a basic injectable or something. That speed is incredibly valuable.
And simultaneously, you'd short emerging market-based generic companies that are heavily dependent on API manufacturing outside the U.S., and compete in those same essential medicine categories.
It makes sense.
The Augmentin XR approval suggests a regulatory moat is actively being built around U.S. facilities. That increases the terminal value of these domestic assets while adding a new layer of regulatory risk for foreign competitors.
It's an industrial policy dividend for domestic producers and a looming headwind for everyone else.
So to wrap this all up, what's the final word?
The Augmentin XR approval was a definitive, successful test case. It proves the FDA is willing and able to use its discretionary power through the CNPV to enforce these broader industrial policy goals. The priority is now clearly U.S. production and supply resilience right alongside clinical merit.
So the CNPV mechanism, even if it's controversial, is now a validated tool. And for you, the listener, it means you have to assess future drug applications through this dual lens: clinical value and alignment with national strategy.
Absolutely. So here is a provocative thought for you to consider as you watch this all unfold. The CNPV voucher is non-transferable. You can't sell it.
Right. U.S. antibiotics can't just sell their fast pass.
Correct. But the validity of that approval pathway, it remains tied to the product, even through a change in company ownership. So how does that affect M&A valuations? Does that successful CNPV application now function as a kind of hidden, non-fungible asset on the balance sheet? If a major competitor wants to acquire U.S. antibiotics, they aren't just buying a factory, they're also buying regulatory de-risking and a massive speed advantage. Does that effectively inflate the acquisition price beyond the clinical pipeline? The market now has to put a price tag on a 60-day review timeline.
That is a very complex calculation and one that will definitely shape biotech deal-making moving forward. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.